a stick with bells on it, and he bangs on the coffin with this stick. He's slowly undoing the coffin, and he bangs the lid of the coffin off, and it scutters off across the room, and the Mary starts to come out, and her eyes light up in the room with you, and she is an incredibly powerful presence.
Welcome to Opening Ceremony. I'm Jess May, and I'm here for enthusiasts, for iconoclasts, for anarchists, and for you, my constellation. Welcome, everybody. After a long, arduous attempt to meet up, we have finally done it. So I'm really excited to introduce you. You're Dr. Jenny, aren't you?
Yes.
Dr. Jenny. And is it Uzzell or Uzzell?
It's Uzzell.
Uzzell! None of the above.
None of the above.
Dr. Jenny Uzzell, yes?
Yes.
So Dr. Jenny Uzzell is a freelance researcher and academic in the field of pagan studies and death and bereavement studies. Her doctorate from the Centre for Death and Life Studies at Durham University, where the other Dr. Jenny had also studied, looks at the ritualisation of death among modern British Druids. And I know that this is that is very current. People are really into this. Jenny is a member of a number of Druid Orders and is the education and youth manager for the Pagan Federation. She is also an educational consultant in the field of religious education. She's a co-owner of a progressive funeral home in the northeast of England. And she is absolutely brilliant for being here. I can't ever believe that these people agreed to come and talk to me. I just think this is incredible. It's so exciting because I think there's probably quite a lot of misinformation out there about paganism, and we'll get into that. And I'm quite intrigued by that personally. First of all, trigger warnings, everybody. Welcome to Opening Ceremony. We share ceremonies on here and the human stories that shape them. That's what we're for. And obviously, as part of that, sometimes we can end up talking about death, and we will be in this one, as you can probably guess from the way that I've introduced Dr. Jenny. So if you are recently bereaved, if you don't want to be listening to stuff about death right now, we're going to be speaking about Sahmain, so obviously, or Halloween. So we need you to know that. Dr. Jenny says she doesn't think she's going to get gory, but it is possible, and it's always possible on this podcast. But I'd just like you to say a little bit, Jenny, about yourself, if you can.
That bio, I think, probably pretty much sums it up. I got my doctorate about 2 years ago, and that kind of squared a circle, I suppose, or circled a square. It brought together the different parts of who I am. So I've always kind of been an academic. It's kind of at the heart of my being, I suppose. It's what I've always wanted to do. But I've got quite a circuitous route there. So my first degree from way, way back is in biblical studies. And then my master's is in world religion. And this wasn't intentional. I did not intend to do a master's degree based around death and the afterlife, but I kind of did. When I sort of look back at it, everything was about death, dying, bereavement in various different religions. And my doctorate, as I've said, looks at modern Druids and the various ways in which they ritualize death and memorialization. I'm a funeral director. We own a funeral home in the northeast of England. And what we mean by progressive, we started off calling ourselves alternative, and that never really sat right with me because most of the funerals we do are not alternative. They're very traditional. Progressive, we're moving away from the men in black suits vision of funeral directing.
Hallelujah.
We're trying to move away from men in black suits with big shiny cars.
Are we all?
So we're members of the Good Funeral Guide, who are fabulous, fabulous people that are trying to push public awareness towards what is possible. And the fact that, you are in charge of your funeral director, they're not in charge of you.
That's so good. I've not heard that before. That's a good catchphrase.
Yeah,
you were
absolutely.
in charge of your funeral director. They are not in charge of you. That's so good.
We're working for our families. They're not, dependent on what we tell them they can do. So basically, as long as it's legal and possible, we'll find a way to make it happen, which has taken us to some very interesting places over the years.
That's hilarious. I want to know. My constellation, they like to know.
I think one of the most interesting ones was when we found ourselves up on the top of Bowes Moor doing a burial in the grounds of a little farmhouse up on the top of the moor. And we'd had to sort of drive in the estate car with a coffin in the back, sort of vertically upwards. It felt like for quite some distance, and then back down again with the coffin on the back of a flatbed truck. And we were convinced. I think Keith actually rode on the back of the flatbed on that occasion because we were convinced that the coffin was coming off and going to wind up in the river.
It's just
But
pure comedy, isn't it?
but it went brilliantly at the end.
Oh, the things people do. So Jenny and Keith, so this is your partner in life as well as in
Yes.
business.
Yes.
So it's like a team, the
So
pair
we kind of
you.
have to get on well. We spend pretty much 24 hours a
Yeah.
day together,
Yeah.
so we have to get on well.
It's quite intense
Yes.
also. So I bet you've got a wicked sense of humour. That would be my guess.
Yes. I mean, yeah. I mean, a lot of funeral directors talk about how they cope with what they
Yeah.
do. And I read somebody's PhD from the 70s quite early on in my research. And she was saying that the way that funeral directors deal is by detaching and by not emotionally engaging, by objectifying so that the coffin becomes a box that has to be logistically moved from A to B. And I thought at the time, well, if that's how you are dealing with it, you really should not be in this job at all. You should be doing something else.
I couldn't agree more.
I say we deal with it, and sometimes I mean I can remember because my background is not in funerals at all. Keith's is more than mine. He'd been working in a large funeral company for a while before we met. My background is teaching, and I remember saying to him quite early on because I'd got quite upset about one of the funerals we were doing, and he said, "Are you okay? Are you sure this is something you can do, something you want to do?" And I said to him, well, if I'm going home in tears every night, then I can't do this job. I need to do something else. If I'm never going home in tears, then probably I shouldn't be doing this job. And that's kind of the approach we take. The way we deal, to be perfectly honest, is we support each other and we laugh a lot.
Yeah.
And that's how we get through.
I'm with you. I think absolutely right. If you're not upset at all, or if you're absolutely inconsolable,
Yeah.
those two extremes, no. But
Yeah.
if you're engaged and really being very human, then that's the best way.
Absolutely.
I want to know what we want to talk about, particularly what most people will think of as Halloween, or I'm saying most people, maybe they won't. And I need you to help me pronounce it. Sahmain, is that right?
No.
No.
The M is actually weirdly silent, as if, a lot of
Okay.
Celtic words are. It's pronounced Samhain.
Samhain. So first of all, I was writing it as Samhain.
Yeah.
Looked it up on the internet as Samhain and thought, well, I've got that wrong. It's Sahmain. So good. So that's the first thing we need to know. We're talking about Samhain, not
Yes.
Sahmain, because that's not even a thing. So we're talking about that, and that for some of you will be Halloween, and some of it people might think of All Souls, that time of year. And we're going to be releasing this at that time of year so that we can talk about it and might be talking a little bit about Day of the Dead, all that kind of time. And it's going to be part of a series. So I'm really excited for that. So what I'd like to know is first of all, what made you geek out on paganism? And second of all, what can you tell us about Samhain? Those are probably the first two questions I'd like.
Okay, so why did I geek out on paganism? That is a really difficult question. I blame my mother, who is not a pagan, by the way.
Is that why?
She thinks she's an atheist. I think she's an animist, and we discuss it regularly. But what she was heavily into traditions. So when I was growing up, she made me do, and I'm an only child, I don't have any brothers or sisters. She made me do lots of weird things. I mean, she would, if there was a comet or something astronomical going on, she would quite commonly burst into my bedroom very loudly at sort of midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning and say, "Oh, good, you're awake too." And then suggest that we got in the car and drove to a field somewhere where we could look at it.
I mean, I love her for that.
So that's sort of how I grew up. And if she found any sort of traditions, she would go for the traditions. So I'm thinking particularly of wassail. So my grandmother lived in a house that had a cherry tree in the garden. It wasn't an especially big garden, but it had a cherry tree in it. And my mum discovered about wassailing, so she proclaimed that we were going to wassail the cherry tree. So we dragged my nan and my 2 aunts and my dad and my mum and my cousin, who was extremely bewildered, into the garden to wassail the cherry tree and sort of bang drums at it and things. And we had a fire lit, and my auntie Elsie managed to set a fire to her wellies. So she was running around the garden on fire, and we were trying to put her out. And I think I must have been about 8 or 9 at this point. So this is why I say I blame my mother.
This is brilliant. This is brilliant.
But I also used to get, and this is very, very difficult to explain, I used to get this really odd feeling of the land and of the landscape, particularly just as there's a bit where the sun is setting, particularly in summer, where for a little while the land is brighter than the sky. And I think the Scots call it the gleaming. And it's just a magical time. And if I was out driving at that when I was a little girl in my dad's car at that time, there was just this numinous feeling that came off the land that I could never explain with anything else. And as a result of the school that I went through a period of time where I was trying very hard to be an evangelical Christian.
I tried
And
that, Jenny. I tried
didn't really
that.
take.
Mm-mm.
It's largely how I wound up for my first degree at Durham doing biblical studies. I was trying to get back to that very, I'm going to say, simplistic faith. I
I'm
never
all right with that.
succeeded. I never succeeded in doing that. And for a while, it left me a very unhappy atheist. But I think that excitement in the land and being outside and old stories was always there. And it kept sort of creeping back in until I found the people that were sharing those stories and were sharing those feelings and who I could talk to without feeling like an idiot. And they were pagans. And so it's like, okay, I got in with them, and particularly the people who were having, it wasn't that I needed a label for the set of beliefs. And I don't like talking about beliefs particularly because this is one of my really strong assertions. I don't think religion is fundamentally about beliefs. I think it's about
Oh.
embodiment, but that's a whole different thing. I think we get tied up with beliefs in the West, certainly in sort of post-Enlightenment Protestant Christianity, that says religion is all to do with what you believe, and it is all to do with doctrine. And actually, for most people in the world, at most times, that is not what religion is. It's as much a verb as it is anything else. It's what you do.
These are brave words. If there are people out there who haven't studied theology, and we are a little bit of a minority, Jenny, these are brave words, but they're also good words, and I like
They
them a
are.
lot.
And there's a scholar, an Australian scholar, Douglas Ezzy, who has written quite a bit about religion. And he defines religion as basically a means by which you live a life endowed with soul and meaning. Now, most Druids very strongly reject the word religion. They talk about spirituality, which is a word I have different problems with.
Love
But
that you have so many problems with words.
You do. But they reject religion because they see it as being dogmatic and hierarchical and telling you what to believe. And Ezzy says that religion basically comes down to a set of stories through which you interpret the world. It comes down to community, and it comes down to ritual, engaging in ritual. So that also help you to make sense of the world. And if you're going to say that religion is story, community, and ritual, then it would be very hard to find a way of not defining Druidry as religion. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And my definition of religion very often involves supernatural beings, but it doesn't absolutely have to.
I love that
So,
you're so nuanced. It must
yeah.
be something about Dr. Jenny's. The other one was really nuanced. And I'm still here thinking, I want both Dr. Jenny's at the same time. It would be a disaster for me, but it would be great for everyone else. I love that you're so nuanced. I love it. I love that because there's so much dogma
Yes.
in academia as well. It's not just within the text or within the institution. So,
Yeah.
tell
I think
us more.
in religious studies, it's changing. There is starting to be a much wider understanding of what we mean by religion. And this is coming out of scholars like Ezzy and Graham Harvey. And also in 2000, a scholar called Mallory Nye wrote a paper arguing that we shouldn't be talking about religions as bounded monolithic things. We should be talking about religioning as something that people do. And I absolutely loved that.
That's made me go all goosebumpy. I love it.
So,
Never heard it, love it.
yeah, well worth checking out. So I got in with the Druids, got in with that way of thinking. And then as time went on, you speak about nuance, I also started meeting a lot of Christians who were pulling very much in the same direction and had the same openness and the same, was certainly sort of doing the same thing that I did, even if they were using a different set of language. So I sort of have had this really bizarre relationship with Christianity where I sort of moved into this really, the type of evangelical Christianity I was involved with, I would say was quite toxic. And I moved away from that completely, and I've come back into this sort of fusion where I'm fascinated with the liminal spaces between Druidry and paganism and Christianity, where that Christianity is very much engaged with the natural world and with openness and with dialogue. So yeah, that's kind of where I am.
Oh my God, you're already a woman of surprises. I love this. I love this. Oh, yeah. So we don't need to even start with defining and labeling. We're talking about experience.
Yes. Yeah.
That's my favorite thing.
And of course, when you get to funerals, again,
Mm.
it's an experienced event.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the biggest problem we have with funerals in this country, particularly with non-religious funerals, because if you're dealing with a church funeral, everybody knows what they're doing. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They know what it's for. And of course, now the majority of funerals are not religious. And there are some fantastic civil celebrants out there who are doing wonderful things. But what most of them are doing is talking. And
That's
what
right.
most of them are doing is talking at the congregation. And this is where I feel that the relevance of studying Druid ways of doing funerals and ways of remembering is useful, because Druids are very good at ritual. And ritual is the thing that civil celebrants have not traditionally been good at. They're good at the words. They're not good at the involvement, the immersion, the experience of a funeral.
This is
And
so
this is where
interesting. This is
I
so
think
interesting.
Druidry helps.
Yeah, that's lovely. Well, Rosalie is coming on. Do you know Rosalie? She has a fabulous Dutch name and I can't say it, but she's from Rituals Today and she's a
No,
London-based celebrant. And she's going to come on and talk about somatic experience. And
excellent.
I'm really excited for you to, that might come out at the same time. Because this is like, it's the same game. It's the same game.
Yeah.
Embodiment, movement. Yeah.
Yes,
I
exactly.
do way too much talking in my
And
ceremonies.
involvement.
Yeah, engaging with it. Oh, lovely.
Because far too often what you have from a celebrant is somebody that sits in front of the bereaved people and tells them stories that they already know about the person that's died. And, it almost feels sometimes like, you tell your story to a celebrant so they can tell it back to you. And
That's
there has
horrible.
to be a better way of doing things than that.
I think so. I think if your story is literally that, it's just not helping you find
Yeah.
meaning. It's
And that's not by all means all celebrants. I mean, don't get that
Yeah.
wrong. And we work with some fabulous celebrants. But where I think celebrancy needs to move on is in this engaged, embodied, experiential, and people taking control and being involved. And that's where I think we can learn from what the Druids are doing.
Oh, I love this. I hadn't expected you to go there, and I'm really thrilled. And one of the things I love about my podcast is that we do just follow the mood. We follow where we find ourselves. We don't really rehearse this. So if you're listening to this, it's not none of our stuff is pre-rehearsed. We just have a conversation in real time. So Samhain is obviously. So I was thinking, what do I really want for my podcast to feel or experience in this? I would really love to think about how we start to reclaim traditions or incorporate tradition and movement and ritual, or even just times of the year that are special. How do we do that? How do people out there who think Halloween, sweets, slightly traumatized children, Traumatized parents, people locking their doors and saying no children welcome here, or Home Alone. And is it Home Alone that there's a film, isn't there? That might be Christmas actually. But anyway, the all the movies, the American movies, and all the little people dressed as skeletons and the pumpkins. So that's the one thing. Then you've got Day of the Dead, people are familiar. Samhain is increasingly popular and unknown, but I think probably still not as well known as putting sweets out for children. So what good is it? So you've got people saying Halloween, they don't know what it is. So it's all kind of together in a mush, isn't it?
It is.
And so that's what I'm quite interested to do. I'm interested to see what different people are saying about this event that happens every year around the same time
Mhm.
from different traditions, and how that might be helpful for us to think about.
Okay. So what Samhain is, um, it is one of the festivals on what pagans call the Wheel of the Year, which is 8 seasonal festivals that are helpful in terms of plugging into what is happening in the world around you and outside you, and noticing and being aware of the changing seasons and remembering that you are a part of it. You're not, by virtue of being a human, something that is cut off and isolated from the rest of the world. And Samhain is the one that is, it takes place at more or less the same time as Halloween. There is a lot of debate within paganism as to whether the Christians stole a pre-existing pagan festival or not. My feeling, which is not uncontroversial, is that it is actually the other way round, that this is a purely Christian festival that started, I think, in the 11th century as a way of honouring the saints and the martyrs. And from there, it sort of worked its way outwards into remembering the dead. And it has been appropriated by paganism over the years. I think Robert Graves had a lot to do with that. Having said that, it has been appropriated brilliantly and cleverly, and it achieves so much. For me, as a practicing pagan, I would say Samhain is the most important of those festivals for me personally, for my practice. And it is, on one level, it's about entering the dark half of the year. So as far as we could tell, the Celtic peoples didn't really think in terms of 4 seasons. They thought in terms of the bright half of the year and the dark half of the year. And Beltane, at the beginning of May, is where you enter the bright half of the year, and Samhain at the end of October is when you enter the dark half of the year. So it's a time when things wind back, and it's also a time when a lot of pagans will talk about the veil being thin. So the things that separate ordinary mundane reality from what a lot of pagans think of as the other world, the summer lands, Anun, Anuvan, there are different names for it, is particularly thin. And because it's particularly thin, it's a time where you can communicate with the spirits and also with the ancestors more easily. And in Druidry, this connection to the ancestors is hugely, hugely important. I think it's also really important to clarify what we mean by ancestors, because if you're not careful, people pick this up and run with it, and suddenly we're into pure bloodlines and all sorts of other horrible things like that.
That's a really helpful point.
Yeah.
Yes, be aware, people. Be aware. Have your critical lens on when
Yeah,
any of
and
this is happening.
it is nothing like that. And I know particularly in America with heathenry, which is a branch of paganism that deals with Viking, Norse, and Anglo-Saxon gods, there are people that take this, you have to be of Viking or Saxon descent to worship these gods and various other very silly things. For Druids, we tend to think of ancestors in 3 categories. Ancestors of blood, which is fairly self-explanatory. They are the people from whom you are genetically descended. Ancestors of place, which are the persons, and I'm going to say persons because not all of them are necessarily human, that have inhabited the particular part of the planet that you find yourself on at the moment, and with whom it is useful to form a relationship. So one of the things that does for me is researching the local history of the area where I am, because it's not the area I grew up. It's not very far away, but it's not that area. And if I were to move somewhere else, if I was to move to another country or another place in this country, I would see one of my tasks as familiarizing myself with the stories, the landscape, the history of that place, because those people then become my ancestors of place. And the third category is ancestors of tradition. So they are all of the people who have to some extent contributed to make you what you are. So in Druidry, ancestors of tradition are going to be the people that have shaped modern Druidry as it exists today. I'll give you some names, they won't mean anything. So people like William Price, Yola McGannog, Ross Nichols, John Avery, William Stukeley. These are all people that a lot of Druids consider to be ancestors of tradition because they shaped the way that Druidry is in the world now.
Can I just ask a question?
Of course.
Tell me what is the difference between Druidry and paganism, and also maybe a little bit about, because there's neo-paganism, paganism's quite a broad church. There's this guy that you mentioned who may have had quite a lot to do with appropriating from the church. So just a little tiny snippet of history and a little bit of explanation of the terms.
Okay, I will do my best to do this quickly. So paganism started out as a derogatory term. The Romans used it to describe peasants, basically, people that lived in the country who weren't very sophisticated. And later on, in a similar derogatory way, Christians used it to refer to anybody who wasn't a Christian because they were not really civilized and they didn't really understand. The modern pagan movement, I would say, really, you can trace bits and bobs all the way back to pre-Christian times, but they are tiny little snippets and ideas. Really, the modern pagan movement, I would say, kind of has its roots in the Romantic poets. So round about your mid 1700s onwards, you start to have this movement away from the idea that you encounter God in a closed building that is cut off from everything around you. You have a movement away from the very patriarchal and masculine view of Christianity. You have the Romantic poets talking about nature as a church and as a more authentic place to encounter the divine. You start to see a lot of poetry talking about Pan, who was a minor little god for the Romans and the Greeks, but comes to represent the wild force of nature in the modern pagan movement and has now sort of been subsumed a little bit by the image of the green man. So all of these things start feeding in, and then at the turn of the century, you have the occult movements, you have the Golden Dawn, you have theosophy, so you have this seeking, this questing after hidden ancient knowledge. And all of these streams start to come together. And particularly, I would say, in the late 50s, where you have Joel Gardner, who says that he has rediscovered through the new Forest Coven this group of people that have been practicing these ancient religious things going way back. He codifies that, presents it in a way that can be seen as a religion. And that really starts to take off. It fills the zeitgeist of the 60s and the 70s, where there's a lot of ecological concern and awareness, and also a desire for personal freedom and not being tied to dogma, not being told what to think. And all of this fed very much into paganism. And I feel we're kind of back into a zeitgeist now with the huge concern over ecological destruction and climate change. People are coming back again. And what we're also now starting to see is a concern, a shift in worldview amongst some people. So we've been very much, I've been talking about this post-Enlightenment Western standpoint that is very capitalist and wants to see everything as a commodity. So how do I make money out of X? And there is a small, but I hope growing movement away from that, that is animistic, that is connected, that, so if you see the difference, it's kind of like the difference between looking at a river and saying, well, that's going to the sea, so that is a really convenient way of getting rid of all my sewerage. And while we're at it, I can get a fish out of it. I can use it to turn this. I can use it to power that. So I can moneyfy it. I can, capitalize on it. It's the difference between seeing a river like that and seeing a river as a person that has rights and has as much right to exist and to be there as you do. And as soon as you start looking at a river like that, it becomes a lot more difficult to empty all of your sewerage into it.
I feel like you've listened to my Meg Avon episode. Have you listened to it?
I haven't,
Maybe?
no.
Oh my goodness. We've got to get you all in a room together. So she's Megan Trump and she married the River Avon to try and get it personhood
Yeah.
status. She
Yeah.
came on. So it's the same. Yeah.
It's the same thing. And I think there is actually a river in the Amazon that has the legal status of a person in terms of having rights. So you can't just do whatever you want. Its welfare needs to be considered. And actually, there is a wonderful new journal that is out that people might be interested in. It's called Homecoming. And it's published by Urux Press. And it is writings of academics and writers and poets. It has stories, it has artwork, but it is all trying to come from an animist perspective.
Tell
And
me what does animist actually mean? Because a lot of my people won't know what that is.
so it's a term that was first defined by Edward Tyler in the late 1800s. And because he was, although he considered himself an atheist, I think, he was again living in a world that had been shaped by Christianity. And therefore, he thought very much in this Cartesian dualist way that people are made of a body and a soul, and that those two things are completely different. They have different destinies, and that you are effectively a soul in a meat suit. And this was Descartes' basic position. And the meat suit is not entirely desirable. You need to kind of transcend that if you possibly can. This is kind of the position we've always come from. So Tyler looked at indigenous religions and communities that he was studying, and he came to the conclusion that a lot of them had this primitive view of religion called animism, which meant that they believed everything had a soul. And that obviously they were mistaken in this, and they couldn't tell the difference between things that were alive and things that weren't alive. And then proper real religions came along and educated them, and that made it all better. Graham Harvey in modern academia has written huge amounts about animism. And his position is, it's referred to in paganism and in academia as new animism. And he is very clear that this is not new animism in the sense that it's a new belief system or people doing something new. He said this is actually the correct understanding of what was there all along. Tyler's understanding was not correct. And that animism is the idea that the world is enchanted and that it is inhabited by many, many persons, not all of whom are human. And that refers, yes, it can refer to supernatural beings like spirits and ancestors and gods, but it also refers to things like rivers and mountains and hills and the animals that are trying to live in the same space as you.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, that's brilliant. And what about Druidry? How does that play in?
Druidry particularly has its roots, I would say, in the Romantic movement. So paganism, if you think of paganism as being like an umbrella, and there are many traditions, spiritual, religious traditions within it. So things like Wicca, traditional witchcraft, heathenry, goddess spirituality, Druidry, there are all of these different strands within. And they kind of have family connections. So they all tend to be very much concerned with reverence for nature. They all tend to be very much concerned with foregrounding the feminine. Some more than others, but the divine feminine, the feminine as a source of magic and power and wisdom. Just as kind of a way of redressing the balance, because we've had an awful lot of masculine-based religion for a very long time. So some forms of paganism look only to a goddess. Some look to a variety of gods and goddesses, understood in different ways. Some don't really look for gods or goddesses at all. They're purely in terms of this animist way of looking at the world. What I would say is very distinctive about Druidry. So Druidry kind of has its roots in Britain in an organisation called the Universal Bond, which was active at the start of the 20th century. That was very influenced by the Golden Dawn, by the Theosophical movement, also by socialism. And it was trying to form the people that were in the Universal Bond believed, mistakenly, that the Druids had come from Mesopotamia and from Egypt and from Phoenicia, bringing the megalithic culture with them, because they tended to believe at that point that the Druids had built the stone circles. They're actually much older than what we know of the original Druids. And that they were effectively monist, so that they believed not so much that there was one God, but that everything was one God. And a lot of those people thought that Christianity had become corrupt, it had overcomplicated, and they were trying to get back to that purity. So at the turn of the century, the spiritualism of Druidry was quite monist, but it was also influenced by new ideas that were coming out of the East, out of Buddhism and out of Hinduism through the Theosophical movement. So again, it was about ancient hidden mysteries and bringing these to the fore. And then it turned into OBOD, the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, which kind of got a revamp in 1984 when a chap called Philip Carr-Gomm took over as the chosen chief. And he really started moving it in a direction that would be recognized as pagan. So we talk about usually Celtic gods and goddesses. How people understand those varies. Some are hard polytheists that actually believe that there are individual gods and goddesses. Some are soft polytheists, which means they use the language, they use the symbolism, they use the ritual, but they more believe that the different gods are ways of thinking about natural forces like wind and rain, or their ways of externalizing parts of our own personality.
Oh my goodness, this is so complex.
It is.
And you hear so many people, and especially going back to what you said about this Viking purity nonsense.
Oh, yeah.
People are absolutely pinching pagan ideas and using them in really
using them
unhelpful
for
ways.
really not very helpful things.
Really bad purposes. So how can we look at, let's get back to the Samhain, because this is really, really helpful. We've got all that background now and we've got the language and we understand it. Tell us what Samhain, what you do for Samhain. What does that look like for you?
Okay. So I'm just going to finish that last thought a tiny bit.
Yeah, do.
What is different distinctive about Druid paganism? Not all Druids call themselves pagans, but that is a whole nother complex area. But it's the ancestors, connection with ancestors particularly strong. Connection with something called Arwen, which I'm going to come back to. And Arwen is the idea of flowing creativity and inspiration. And this is really at the heart of what Druidry is about. And because of that, things like storytelling, poetry, and art are seen as devotional religious actions in their own right. They're ways of connecting with the divine in their own right. And this connection with Arwen, and also the roots in activism, in socialism, in protest, in social justice, again, are really at the heart of what Druidry is about. So with that on the back burner, Samhain is, I think, incredibly helpful because it does something that in this country we are extremely bad at doing. And that is, it provides an annual opportunity to connect up with and think about our dead. And we really are not good at that. We're very, very good at this country at putting death in a box and putting it over there somewhere. And in a lot of European countries, they are much better than this. So at All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day, they will go and they will clean the family gravestones and they will take food and they will take lights. And that is something that we just don't do. So when somebody dies, we have a funeral. And it might be a good funeral or it might be a bad funeral. And increasingly, it might be a direct cremation, and don't even get me started on that.
You must come back.
It happens, and then it's done. We put that in a box and we try to move on. And we expect people to be over it because the funeral's happened. And that person then is left in kind of a limbo. And what Druidry and other kinds of paganism do really well at Samhain is that they come back each year. So you are remembering ancestors and you are honouring ancestors, and those ancestors can be ancient ancestors. And I suggested actually in my work a fourth category of ancestor, which is the tribal or cultural ancestor. Because a lot of Druids, when they talk about ancestors, what they are talking about is a sort of homogenous, unknown collection of pre-Christian people with whom they identify because they have consciously rejected this Christian, very reductionalist worldview. And so this is an opportunity to connect with ancestors, to remember that we have come from somewhere, that we have been made what we are by the sacrifices and the hardships of other people, and to be grateful for that. So, for example, I am sitting here able to have a doctorate from a university, able to have a career, several, in fact, it feels like sometimes, able to not spend my entire life having children and washing clothes and all of these things. And I live in a house that is consistently warm and dry, and I consistently have enough food to eat. And it's very easy to forget that for my great-grandmother, for her mother, these things were unthinkable. And that's not all that long ago. And a lot of those things are available to me because of things that they did. And it's a chance to remember that and to be grateful for that. And also, a lot of Samhain ritual remembers the recently dead. So it's a chance to look at all the people, including animals very often, that are important to you that you have lost in the last year. And to remember them and to call them back into memory and to tell them that they're still loved and to tell them that they're remembered and that they are in fact still a part of the community, that, we are living and they are not living, but we will be ancestors. And that's another very, very sobering fact, that whether you have children or not, because we have this idea of ancestors of place and ancestors of tradition. And I don't have children. And, I think, well, I'm never going to be an ancestor, but actually I'm writing books and I'm doing things like this. And this means that I'm in a position where I may very well be an ancestor of tradition. And that is a responsibility that needs to be taken seriously. What is the legacy? What is the message that I want to pass on? And Samhain allows you to bring all of those things into consciousness and all of those things into mind, and to remember that the living and the dead are part of a single continuum, and that people don't stop being part of us and they don't stop being our family, and we don't stop having relationships with them when they die. And Samhain lets you do that, and that is something that I think is not very common in Britain, and I think psychologically it is so helpful to be able to do it.
That is so interesting. Bringing them to consciousness is what hit me.
Yeah.
Because there's so much unconscious stuff we carry around. And the spaces where we're allowed to bring them up are very few and far between, especially if you're not privileged enough to be able to afford therapy.
Yes.
Well, you're very, very, very busy because you're trying to feed 6 children in a multiple occupancy household and you're working night shift. You are not always going to be able to bring to consciousness those people or those things. Having that moment feels really important. And it brings me back to what you were saying about connectedness to all things. It feels like it's part of the same thing.
Absolutely.
Carry on, this is fascinating.
So, and also something that, and again, when you mention, therapy, ancestral healing. So Samhain rituals can give people the space to confront things that are difficult about their ancestry, about complicated or hard relationships with parents that have died, and to have a ritual space to put that somewhere you can see it rather than somewhere where you're repressing it, and to deal with it. And there are various rituals that allow that. So in terms of what actually happens at Samhain, there are very various, many and varied. Most pagans, most druids that I know love the dressy up and the sweets and the pumpkins and, go overboard with the houses.
Oh, do they?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
That's fun. I think everyone will be relieved to hear that.
Yeah, yeah. But in terms of the more serious side, there are a number of different things that happen. So in Obod, there is a particular ceremony that takes place. So there are ceremonies for each of the main festivals, and they effectively involve people standing in a circle, and there are various ways of making that circle sacred space. And then during the Samhain one, the ancestors are invited to join you, and they enter the circle through the southeast door. And you just basically get to sit with them. And various offerings are made to the fire in the middle, and they're things like bread and salt and honey and wine. And it's a reminder that your ancestors needed those things and that they enjoyed those things. And it's just a time to sit. And sometimes there is somebody who takes on the role of the Cailleach, who is a difficult figure to tie down. She appears in Welsh and Scottish mythology. In Druidry, she has become a sort of winter deity and a psychopomp and a guardian of the boundary between winter and summer, and also the boundary between life and death. And people are invited to write things down that they want to get rid of, that they want to remove from their lives, that they want to let go of. And they're put into a cauldron and they're set fire to. So it's about moving on. It's about spending time with the ancestors, remembering them, honoring them, and then moving on. Other rituals that I've seen at this time, the Anglesey Druid Order do a fabulous Samhain ritual. Very, very emotionally powerful. And again, it takes place in a darkened room after the waking of the Mari, which is something I'll talk about in a minute. And every person that is there is given a tea light candle. And in the middle is an altar, and the altar is decorated. So it has Halloweeny things on it, like pumpkins and skulls. And it also has, very often, orders of service from funerals of people that have died during that year, or photographs of people that have died during that year. And you go around the circle, and each person lights their candle. And then they have a few minutes to talk about whoever they want to. A person, very often a pet, somebody that they've lost during that year. Sometimes 2 or 3 people that they've lost during that year. And when they finish speaking, everybody replies to them, "May they be remembered." So you have that communal support for your grief. And then you take your candle and you put it in the middle. And the one that I went to, because this is a very popular ceremony, the one that I went to, we wound up with about 200 candles burning in the middle by the end of it. And Chris Hughes, who's the Archdruid of the ADO, who was leading the service, just sort of looked at this huge blaze of candles in the middle and he said, "Behold your dead." And that was such a powerful moment. It really was. And it's, again, this idea that, there they are. They haven't gone away. They're there. They're part of you. They're part of the ceremony. And then it finishes with, a little speech, and then something that you hear very often in paganism around the dead, which is, "What is remembered lives." So that while you hold people in consciousness, whatever your beliefs about life after death, and they are many and varied in Druidry, whatever they are, while you are remembering, while you are holding somebody in your consciousness, they are still in a very real way alive, and they're still with you, and they're still influencing you. They still have agency because they're still acting on how you choose to behave. So that is a really powerful ritual.
It sounds beautiful. It sounds so relevant and so
Yeah,
helpful. I can think of so many ways in which that applies to people I've worked with
yeah,
and to myself. And it feels as though you wouldn't need to call yourself a pagan in order to do any of that stuff.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. These are all things that could helpfully, I think, and this is why I'm saying that bringing this in to how we think more widely about death and the ritualization of death and memorialization is something that psychologically could be incredibly helpful. Something that also sometimes happens is what's called a dumb supper, where you sit down to have a meal, and this is done in various different ways. So at one point towards the beginning of the meal, a bell is rung. And from that point on, nobody speaks. The meal's done completely in silence. And sometimes it's done backwards. So you would start with a dessert and work your way forward to a starter, not always. But there is a place set for the dead. And the idea again is that you are inviting this person to remember that they're still a part of you, that they're still loved, that they're still remembered, and that they are still sharing food with you. So food is set for them, which is usually left out for the animals afterwards. And you just have this meal, and then at the end of it, when the last food's been eaten, then the bell is rung again, and then you have stories, you have songs, you share memories, and again, it's bringing that person back into mind, back into memory, or those people, because it may be many people, and candles are left burning at the windows to show them the way in, and it's just a way of making connection again. And then something that is very much gaining popularity at the moment is the Mari Lwyd. And there's a degree of controversy about this because it is very much a Welsh custom. So what we have of it the earliest record we have is from 1800, and it's in South Wales. And it's a sort of Christmas mumming tradition where a group of people will go round the houses with a horse's skull on a stick with a white cloth around it. And they'll knock on doors, and then they will take part in what's called a punko, which is a poetic contest. So the people inside are trying to keep the horse out, and the people outside are trying to persuade the people inside to let it in. And inevitably, the Mari party wins in the end, and the Mari is allowed into the house, where it capers around causing chaos, knocking things over, and they're given food and drink, and it brings blessing and good luck for the new year. It's that sort of tradition. But in the last 10, 20 years, it's kind of been adopted into pagan thinking. And this is where the controversy is, because outside Wales, is this appropriation? Is it not appropriation? And there's a lot of discussion around this. But in a lot of Druid and pagan circles, it's come to be seen, and Christopher Hughes has written a beautiful thing about this, and I've got this in my doctorate. I did a wonderful interview with him about the Mari. So there's a chapter in my doctorate on the Mari and how it functions in Druidry. And he said that the way it's being utilized, and this is not historically what it is, but religion changes, traditions change, and it is understood very often as being a personification of Rhiannon, who is a sovereign, understood as a sovereignty land goddess in her winter aspect. And as a deity, a sort of winter goddess who presides over the dark half of the year and who guides the souls of the dead to where they need to go. And you will find that in a lot of Samhain rituals, there is a Mari knocking around somewhere. And that the Anglesey Druid, they have a Mari Mon, who is woken up at the Samhain ritual. She comes out of her coffin. And that is one of the most powerful things I have ever seen in my life. It is amazing.
Really? And you've seen a lot. What was it that was so powerful about it?
It was the sense of presence. It's something we don't have a word for. The Hindus call it darshan. And it's the idea of being seen by the divine, being noticed by the divine. And so again, it's the darkened room. It's before the full Samhain ritual, and they have a coffin. Can't see, but it's not a full size coffin. It's about the sort of size you would expect a horse's skull to fit in, and square. And round the circle, people recite the Ballad of the Mary Lloyd, which was a poem written by Vernon Watkins, I think, in the late 1800s. And it's an epic poem. It goes on for quite a while. And there are various verses. And with the ceremony that I was at, some verses were read by people in Welsh, some were read by people in English. You could volunteer to take an English verse or a Welsh verse. And there's a refrain. And when you come to the refrain, the chap in the middle with the coffin, he has a stick with bells on it, and he bangs on the coffin with this stick. And he was very, very skilled. He's slowly undoing the coffin. And there comes a point towards the end of the coffin where he gets the heel of his hand underneath and he bangs the lid of the coffin off, and it scutters off across the room, and the Mary starts to come out. And there's a moment, and I knew it was coming because I saw his hand go under the sheet. And even though I knew it was coming, there's a moment because she has lights in her eyes. And there's a moment where he turns the lights on and her eyes light up. And she's there in the room with you. And she is an incredibly powerful presence. And it is just like something in the pit of your stomach. And she happened to be looking towards me when her eyes came on. It was like, there you are. And it's this moment of seeing and being seen. And when I was talking to Chris on the interview, and I said that since the first time I'd seen a Mary, which was at a workshop on the folklore of horses, I'd felt this really deep, guttural connection with the Mary. And he said, well, yes, of course you do. You're one of us. And by which he meant somebody that works with death and somebody that works with the dead. And that therefore I was one of the people that had this deep connection to the Mary and the aspect of death. And then she comes around the circle and says hello to everybody. And then in Tintagel, in Cornwall, at Samhain, there is something that has developed over the last, I think, round about 10 years called the Dark Gathering. And Marys and osses, usually it's called an oss if it's not in Wales, meet. And they have a big gathering, and there's singing and dancing and Morris dancing, and the whole thing is a celebration of the ancestors and the entering into the dark half of the year and the connection to the past and to the ancestors. And there's a chant that they do where they're dancing, and the words are something like, "Ancestors, dance with us, we hear you, we hear you." And again, it's bringing these two things together, that you're two parts of the same thing, and you're on a continuum. And the Druid ritual for Samhain actually, it has a verse from, I think it's the Wasteland. It's certainly something like that says, the dead become the living and the living become the dead. And reincarnation is a strong belief. It's not the only belief in Druidry, but it's there. And this idea that there is the cycling between the living and the dead, and that they're all part of the same thing. And this is, yeah. I haven't made it to the Dark Gathering yet. It's on my list of things I really want to do. I'll get there one day.
You have to go and then come back and tell us all about it. One of the things that I'm feeling is, and we must get back to Arwen as well before we get on to the questions, but one of the things that I'm picking up from it is that there will have been loads of persecution, I'm presuming, around paganism, and or not.
Well, yes and no. There is a period, I would say possibly more recently than historically. There was a period on the crossover between Christianity and paganism, particularly in the Hellenistic world in Greece and Rome, where the pagans and the Christians were taking it in turns to set a fire to each other, depending on who was more powerful at the time.
God, that sounds a bit too familiar.
And they both did it, and they did it probably in pretty much equal measure. So we know that Christians were persecuted for a while in the Roman Empire, And then when Christians started to get the upper hand in the sort of late 300s and into the early 400s, then the Christians were doing the same thing to the pagans.
Mm.
More recently, you hear a lot, and there's a lot of sort of mythology within paganism about the burning times and the witch trials and this sort of thing. I do not think that that is a persecution of paganism per se. I think, and this is probably even more controversial than saying that the witches that were burnt were not witches in the pagan sense. Yes, a lot of them were women who failed to fit the acceptable model and were therefore not acceptable to the male-dominated society and the male-dominated church.
Yes.
I think a lot of it was that.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of them were magic users. And here comes the controversial bit. Christianity is as full of magic as any other religion.
Oh, that is controversial.
It
That's
is
juicy.
controversial. Yes.
But it's
I
sort
have.
of, I love that. But I'm tying it in, that ties in really well with the thing, because I was saying about the possible persecution. And the reason I mentioned it was because I was thinking, I love this because it's taking bits and pieces, and it's not saying we have a universal thing, like we haven't got an answer to all the things. We quite like that, and we quite
Yeah.
like that, and we
Yeah.
quite like that. Is very contemporary.
Yeah.
And I think it's good. And
Mhm.
that's another controversial opinion, that it's all right to just pick and choose, pick and mix it. And it's not that it's not congruent at all, because it has got an overarching theme
Yeah.
of connectedness,
Yes.
which is beautiful. And I just love that you're just saying, well, there's this and there's that and there's a little bit of this. And then, yeah, it's not ancient. Some of
No.
it is, some of it isn't, some of it's quite fresh. I think that makes a lot of sense to me as to why it's very now, because
Yeah.
it's a very fresh kind of perspective.
Unfortunately, I haven't got the quotation in front of me, but Ronald Hutton, who is the great scholar of all things pagan, wrote in Pagan Dawn magazine a few years ago, I think it was 2016, and it was something like the pagan religions have their roots and their inspiration in the past, but they are uniquely suited for the modern world and a modern world view.
That's amazing.
And that is very, very much the case.
Is he the one that did about naked rituals?
He may have done.
I want to get him on as well.
He may
talking
very
about
well have done.
nakedness and paganism. He was really interesting.
I know Philip Cargommer's written about naked rituals. He's
No, I
definitely
think
done that.
Oh, really? Maybe it was him. Yeah, maybe it was him. See whether we can find a
But
way in.
Ronald Hutton is marvellous.
I'm going to write a little note and get all
talking.
these people on. Tell us about Arwen, because you wanted to come back to that.
Yeah, so Arwen is an idea that is, it's a Welsh word, and the closest it seems to mean is something like flowing. If you go back to some of the early Welsh poetry, there was a Welsh poet by the name of Taliesin, which means shining brow. And he seems to have been writing sometime in the 500s, 600s. But there are many, many poems that were attributed to him that are a lot later, and it's possible that at some point Taliesin became a title rather than a name. There's a book in it. But one of the poems associated with Taliesin, bits of it have found their way into a lot of modern Druid ritual. And the line in question is, the Arwen I sing from the depths I call it. And it's this idea that Arwen has its origins in the other world. Anun means something like not world. Anuvan means the very deep. And this is where Arwen comes from. And it is the creative inspiration that connects you to everything. And it is expressed through poetry, through song, through story. But it can also, and this is an idea I'm seeing expressed by Druids more and more at the moment, it can also be expressed by the way you live your life. It can be expressed by turning your life into a work of art, by living as an aesthetic. And this is an idea that I really love. I have to say, I really love this idea.
We're very excited for that.
The
Can you
British
just-
Druid,
Oh
the
my
British
God.
Druid Order has a T-shirt that says "Be the Arwen."
That's so lovely. Tell us again. It's the creative connect the way.
Most simply, it is the power of creative inspiration. It's the spark of inspiration that you then manifest in the world through what you do.
Oh, I love it. I'm all for that. That
Yeah.
sounds so beautiful. We're running out of time really quickly. So I just need to ask you just very, very quickly the questions. What's your favourite ceremony that you've ever been to?
I think it has to be, and this is going to be really good for saving time, the one that I've described to you with the waking of the Mari, the Anglesey Druid Order, and then the Samhain ritual there.
I had a
The
feeling it might be that.
the power and the sense of connection there was just brilliant.
I mean, I love that you were describing something that if you'd seen it on a film and you got all these kind of inherited ideas around witchcraft or
Yeah,
occult, whatever, you might have seen that and thought, oh, that's really creepy,
really
really
creepy
scary, and
because
really weird.
there's skulls and there's candles and
Yeah,
it looks really creepy.
but you loved it. It
And it
was
was so
really healing.
supportive
Yeah,
because obviously if you're talking about somebody you loved who has died that year, a lot of people got very tearful.
yes.
But that community was around them, supporting them and holding them and saying, "We'll remember them for you. You don't have to
Yeah.
remember them on your own."
And it's
And that
so
was so powerful.
countercultural, isn't it? The
Yeah.
community thing, that's what's missing so
Yes.
much from personal religion and personal devotion. And what's the worst ceremony you've ever been to, if you're allowed to tell us?
It was a funeral. It was a natural burial. So you would think. And it was just a complete lack of what I would call ritual literacy in terms of how things were set out. I'm not going to tell you anything about who it was, where it was, or when it was, but it was the celebration space was a wooden hut. And there was a porch that came outside the hut onto a sort of a decking, I suppose, that gave you some protection from the weather. And then there were two doors quite close to each other that led into the hut. And the coffin was put on trestles in this porch. So everybody is in the hut and the coffin is outside with a wall. There's a glass window, you can see it.
That's very odd.
The doors are open, but there's this wall between you and the coffin, which seemed to me to be really, really odd. And even worse, the coffin was in front of the doors. So
This is
anybody
weird.
coming late, they have to sort of like limbo under the coffin or squeeze their way around it. And we were just going, please, God, do not let there be a fire. Because getting everybody out of that building safely would have been pretty much impossible.
I promise you this isn't one of Jenny's funerals.
It was actually, but it was in a space that we had no control over.
Oh my
We were the
goodness.
funeral directors, but
Oh,
we
how
had
awful.
and we had been, we had been to see the place beforehand to have a look at it. And
Oh.
I thought, well, oh, this is a nice space. The coffin will be in the middle. People will be round it in a circle, which is my instinct always with a
Me
funeral is to do
too.
that.
And very rare that you
And
get the
very rare that
chance.
you can do it. So I thought this is brilliant. But no, we have everybody sitting in rows in the building and the coffin actually physically outside the building. And there were a lot of other things that went wrong with that funeral that had to do with bad communication, bad planning. But to me, it's just this lack of ritual awareness that was very, very poor.
They
So
haven't
that's
got any
probably the
sense of
worst
the
one I've been at.
space, and
Yeah,
space is so important.
yeah,
That sounds so upsetting. When you're a death professional and you know shit, and you
yes.
start watching that, you're like, this is a nightmare. You
Make
can't
it
do
stop.
anything, make it stop. Oh, no.
And in the end, we just, because the place had hired a funeral director to have oversight of ceremonies, which is fine. If a family chose not to use a funeral director, because of course it's absolutely everybody's right. But this family had a funeral director, and it was us. But this other funeral director was still there and still trying to take control. So you basically have two people trying to run the funeral, one of whom has spoken to the family and knows what they want, and the other one hasn't. So this funeral director is trying to get our bearers to lower the coffin into the grave. And we're saying, no, the family have asked for a poem to be read before that happens. So do not touch those staves. And, in the end, Keith just had to say to this funeral director, please go away. We do know what we're doing. Just leave us to it.
Oh, how awful. I bet they
And
were
it was,
wearing pinstripe suits.
oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Okay, the next questions are kind of the same question, I think. Is there anything that you really regret doing or not doing in a ceremony of your own? And then alongside it, with the benefit of hindsight, with the development in community, the way things have changed, anything that you would do that you maybe didn't have the chance to do before?
I don't think there's a lot in terms of ceremony and ritual that I regret. I regret how constrictive the system can be. So the fact that crematoria tend to have pew-like seats that you can't move, although that's kind of getting better because our local one, the first 2 rows are now seats. And while I suspect that we would have a bit of a fight on our hands if we asked them to move them into a circle, we could do it.
Oh,
So
thank
that
God. I'd do
is,
away with those as well.
a
I'm with
step in the
you.
right direction, but the
Mm.
time restrictions. And I think what I'm really liking being able to do is the natural burial ground nearest to us, where there are just no ground rules. So you're starting from what feels useful and working up. So we've had a funeral there for quite a young lad that basically turned into a music festival. And everybody was sitting in a circle on the ground around the coffin, and his dog was there. And, these things that just made it real and made it powerful and meant that it was doing a job. Because I think to me, what people forget, and I think this is also largely responsible for the rise in direct cremation, don't let's go there, is the fact that people have lost sight of the fact that funerals do a job. They
That's
are there
right.
for a purpose to do something. And
Hear,
if they
hear.
are not doing the thing that they are supposed to be doing, then they are a complete waste of time.
Yes.
And if you are restricted to sort of 20 minutes with somebody that you don't know speaking at you, telling you things you already know, then I'm not sure that that funeral is doing much of a job.
It's something you've
And
just got to get through.
yes, exactly, it's to be endured.
Mhm.
And we've had people come back to us and they're almost sheepish and they're saying, "You're going to think this is awful, but I actually really enjoyed the funeral." You go, "No, that's not awful at all. That
The
is,
whole point, you
that's
should.
the point."
Yes.
And again, we hear a lot about celebration of life, and I think that's understood wrongly quite often because in modern parlance, celebration is having a party and having a good time and being excited. And you think, well, I don't want to celebrate the fact that my mum's died. Whereas ritually and in the past, celebrate has meant to observe, to honor, to witness. And in that way, you celebrate Easter, you observe the festival of Easter. And in that way, I think when we speak about celebrating a funeral, it's about honoring, it's about remembering, it's about bearing witness. And if you do that, then there is going to be tears, there's going to be grief, which is something that we also culturally tend to shy away from. But there's also going to be laughter. And a good funeral is one that you come out of and you've cried and you've laughed.
Isn't that the truth? Exactly. It's always the thing, the both and. Finally, what gives you hope for humanity?
It's hard at the moment, isn't it?
It is a little.
It is a little tricky when you're seeing everything spinning
Mhm.
backwards, it feels like, into hatred and into cruelty and into intolerance. And I think what gives me hope at the moment are the little acts of kindness that you see. When you see somebody, and I saw somebody say this, and it really resonated with me, that when you're in a situation like we seem to be in at the moment, real acts of resistance are being happy and being kind.
Yes, I heard the very same thing. Yes. N- Acts of having joy. Yes. I can't remember the exact thing, but it was beautiful. I think it was a person of color talking about that particular kind of oppression that I heard.
Mm,
But I think it is working its way into the culture. But to
yeah,
not allow them to take your joy is absolutely an act of
an act of
defiance.
defiance. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
and
simple,
to be
kind
kind.
things.
Yeah, just little
Yeah.
little things that are just kind.
One thing happened to us today. I'm going to use that as an example. I love your answer. We forgot to pay for a coffee. me and Rinna, we met with my sister-in-law, had lots of drinks, all made off. And I was lying in bed and I said, did we pay for the coffee? He texted his sister, has anyone paid for the drinks? She was like, no. So I was in a state. So we went in, walked in, good 20 minutes, walked in. Really sorry we didn't pay for our bottle of water and our lattes. And this guy was, he's not from the UK. I don't know where he's from. Apparently he has an accent. He said, I love this. What? I love this. I waited outside because there's too many scented candles and it gets to me. And he said, you came in and you told us. And he said, you spend your money here all the time. It is on us. It is a free. Like he just gave it to us for free out of just a goodwill gesture, gratitude for our custom, and for the honesty of going in and saying we owe you money for something that you gave us.
Yeah.
That's a little act of hope, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's really beautiful. I love it. I'm going to have to stop, which kills me, because I feel like we haven't scratched the surface. You were amazing. You were absolutely amazing. So Dr. Jenny's must be the thing, everybody. Dr. Jenny's. We'll have a whole thing, Dr. Jenny Week. Get them both on together, and I feel like they would never stop talking. It would be so interesting. This is why academics are so important, everybody. We listen to celebrities and we should be listening to the academics because they're amazing. Anyway, I love you. I love what you had to talk about. I want you to come back and do it all over again. And I'm not going to let you slip from my radar. This is why I love doing this podcast. I want these voices to reach people. Everyone, I got so overwhelmed with joy that Dr. Jenny with a Y was here that I didn't ask her where you could all find her. But also, in the meanwhile, we were talking about the other Dr. Jenny IE, and Dr. Jenny with a Y actually taught Dr. Jenny with an IE, and they know each other. So that was amazing. I wish I'd recorded that. Anyway, where can they find you?
You can find me. That is a very good question.
She's having to look it up for herself.
You can find me on Facebook. You can find us. The website for the funeral home is Saint and Foster. It's with an R. So SAINTANDFORSTER.co.uk.
And you're based where in the Northeast?
We're based in Darlington.
Darlington.
And I do have a website of my own, which is under construction at the moment. I've got a very good friend sort of linking together on that, everything I've done. And that is a WordPress site, and it's called The Forest Path.